When I was in architecture school, I was assigned a job as a teaching assistant, like a lot of graduate students are. And I was, for some reason, assigned as a teaching assistant in a real estate development class. Now, keep in mind that I, at that point, knew absolutely nothing about real estate development. But by a weird quirk in the way the schools were laid out, the real estate development program was part of the School of Urban Planning, which was part of the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. So I was there as an architectural student, but was TAing this real estate development class. Well, the instructor was a retired New York City developer. Or had experience with developers. You know what developers are like, and you specifically know what New York City real estate developers were like. Donald Trump is sort of the apotheosis of this sort of real estate development. And this guy fit the bill in a lot of ways. He'd made a fortune with the system he had invented for prefabricated low-cost housing, and he would build these really pretty horrible housing units by the thousands and stack them up in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. And he'd made a killing. He had made a fortune. At this point in his life, he was pretty much retired from that. He wintered in Florida, but he flew into New York once a week to teach this class. I mean, he literally flew in the morning, took a taxi from the airport to the university, taught the class, got back in the taxi, went back to the airport, and flew back down. Flew into town every week for just a couple hours. He had taught the same course exactly the same way from the same curriculum and the same outline for so many years that he had all these files with all of his handouts, some of which were so old that they were on purple mimeograph. And all I had to do was make enough copies of all of them and make sure that they were there for the class. He didn't really need a teaching assistant. What he needed was sort of a personal assistant, someone to do errands for him and take care of things for him in New York while he was down in Florida. And thus it was that I found myself standing on the corner of 116th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, waiting to claim the professor's Porsche. He had had somebody drive it up from Florida for the summer so that he could have it there in New York, and he needed somebody to accept delivery for it and put it in the garage. So I'm standing there wondering how this is going to work. A guy pulls up to the curb in this amazing car, and he says, "Are you here to pick up John Peterson's car?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he gave me a form to sign and handed me the keys, and he walks off down the block toward the subway station. And I'm standing here thinking, really? This is really how this is going to work? I'm this scruffy 23-year-old with a bushy ponytail and a leather jacket and a beard. I wouldn't give my car to me. Why is somebody just handing me the keys to this car? And so here I am with this outrageous car. My assignment is to drive it around the block and into the garage. On the one hand, I'm terrified that as I drive it around that block, I'm going to somehow scratch it or damage it or do something to it. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, I've got the keys. I've got the car. Who's going to know, right? I had no illusion that this was my car. I had no illusion that somehow someone had given me this car or that I'd earned this car belonged to me. But for 2 blocks, I thought I was it. I was just praying that some of my friends would be walking down the street so I could, let them see me in this car. And now, as it turned out, fear triumphed over imagination, and I drove the car around the block and put it away the way I was supposed to, and never did any more with it than that. I wish, that the story doesn't have a very exciting ending. But that is one of the images that always comes to my mind when I think about being a good steward or a bad steward. I was the steward of that car. I knew the car didn't belong to me. I had no illusion that it belonged to me. I had just been asked to take care of it for a specific time and a specific task. And I knew I was going to have to account for my use of that car because, frankly, the mileage was on that form that I had signed, and the professor would be able to see what the mileage was when I got the car and when I left it. I knew I was going to have to give the car back. But I was just really thrilled to have access to it for a little while and to be able to enjoy it and to be able to let everybody else enjoy me in it. You know what I mean? And that's kind of the way that the parable of the wicked tenants is often interpreted, strictly in terms of this stewardship of what is not ours. We hear the story about the landowner that prepares the land and then goes away, and we're supposed to believe that God not only owns the land, but God is the one who planted the vines, and God is the one who built the infrastructure, who built the wine press and built the tower, the walls. God created this world and made it good for us to live in, and made it possible for us to live in it. God has given us everything that we need for us to bear fruit. This parable is often interpreted to say that God has given this world into our care and expects us to produce fruit. God's not only given us responsibility for the earth and all that's in it, God has given us the law as a way to live together with one another and with God in shalom, in healthy relationship. And stewardship is what we do with everything that God has given us, with this earth, with the land, and with the law. When we hear this parable, we think about the fact that God has sent the prophets as his servants, and that even God's Son Jesus to remind us of our responsibilities to God and to one another, but that we have chosen to ignore the Word of God. The people of God have abused the prophets and killed God's Son. And the implication is that if we don't get our act together and start living the way God expects us to, God is going to find someone who will. God is going to cast us out of the garden and put somebody else in the garden. Sometimes this is even understood as a rejection of the Jews, an explicit rejection of God's covenant with the Jews and the substitution of the Gentiles as God's people. I don't believe that's true, but it's sometimes interpreted that way.